borrow the title from a Frank O'Hara poem, and Frank O'Hara plays an important role in the exhibition, as do a few other characters. So let's start talking about the men that you've chosen to highlight in this exhibition and why.
Well, there are a few characters, as you describe them, that sort of people the sculptures in various ways throughout the exhibition. There is Frank O'Hara from sort of this moment in the 20th century, the late 1940s, early 1950s, as a sort of poet, curator, social figure, and then earlier in the century, a man named Chick Austin, who was a curator director at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in the late 20s and 30s, is also represented here or invoked here. And Kurt Weill, the musician who traveled from working with Brecht in Berlin in the 1920s to the United States just before the war. And there's also a female as well. There's a little bit of Gertrude Stein that makes an appearance.
And so let's talk about why you chose, what interested you in that constellation of people?
I think that I started wanting to create structures, and I often start by creating structures that are vessels or open frameworks for the possibility of a character, the possibility of narrative, and sometimes they remain quite mute and quite still, and then other times I prefer them to be more talkative and more articulate or certainly more vocal. And I liked this notion of referencing certain subjectivities that might together form a kind of fragmented transhistorical idea of a 20th century artistic subject. And these people in particular, it's always easier for me to work with characters, identities, and personas that I am attracted to, that I feel some affinity to, and I feel maybe are some sort of surrogates for my role somehow, shoes that I might be stepping into momentarily.
At least for a while.
For a while, right.
Trying them on.
Exactly, see if they fit.
Yeah. I think you touched on, but let's talk a little more explicitly about this idea of the modern.
I think of it as sort of a script on a certain level, and that might be oversimplifying it, but it helps me in terms of my work to think of it as modernism as a kind of script, and there were authors to that script, and there were pivotal moments and pivotal scenes, and I think I mentioned this in another talk that I had recently, and I thought of it as doing a show like this and picking these particular figures as skipping a stone across, the water, and where it chooses to land, I decided to focus very intensely on these particular figures and see if there's a coincidence, see if there's a relationship, see if there's anything that binds these sensibilities together or not.
And how does the script end?
Script, well, I'm not sure. I think it's there's a motif in the exhibition that has to do with the vinyl record, the recording, and I think one thing that is kind of a strange memory for all of us, I think, is that endlessly repeating record. The broken record is one way to put it. But I remember when I was little, the record you just keep putting on. I think music and recording is quite different now. There's more of a seamlessness, but that it was tied to a particular object at that time. That the record became interesting to me, and it does have a beginning and end, but it's endlessly repeated. So there is some sort of an end, I suppose, but now it's simply a recorded fact that is open to interpretation and memory and loss of memory that we repeat fragments of.
Yeah. Well, first let's talk about the structure of the individual works.
Right.
And the way that you, like what the works consist of. Because they're part quite exquisitely fabricated and they're part found object. And it seems that so there's almost like three categories of material in the show. There's the fabricated elements, which are rather abstract, although I suppose with Chicks we get some specific domestic architecture reference, and this, the stage structure is suggested, but it's not completely articulated.
Right.
And then there's media, these objects that really come out of a general popular culture, and then personal effects. and you weave them together in each piece, or some combination of that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the way you think about that?
I think that...
Is that accurate?
It is accurate.
To categorize
it
them
absolutely
in those
is.
two ways? Okay.
And I think that I've always come out of a tendency, a working tendency since I was a small person, was that collage was very natural to me, to put things together, to adhere things that came from different locations. And that is quite a simple idea, really, but I think that, even the notion of a musical score attaching itself to theater, these different components interested me more sometimes than than something being a whole. And I did start to think very self-consciously about that. I think maybe this is why, for instance, when I attach images to existing structures, I want to be very conscious of the fact that they are pinned together, that I'm attaching them. I would not want it to be a fused wooden structure that already has the images imprinted on it somehow. That attaching of those disparate elements is important. And in terms of those, it's almost a kind of clear delineation about, and I mentioned this earlier, sometimes I have done these railing pieces in chicks, for instance, where there haven't been any objects connected to them at all. So, and I think of that as levels of discursiveness, and I've often thought about the idea of an installation or an exhibition like this as a social space or as a cocktail party in this instance. And some figures are known but maybe quite quiet and this vernacular maybe doesn't mean that much of the wooden post where it seems the reference is domestic architecture maybe, but as soon as you add another element to it, all of a sudden the conversation starts to get a little bit more heated or louder, or the references get thrown around much more quickly. And I like that push and pull between things that have very clear and specific and precise references, and then when attached to another object or set of materials, shifts and goes somewhere else completely, kind of eludes that fixed meaning. But what I wanted to do here was to do something that was really quite fragmented. I wanted to do individual pieces. I didn't want to do something monolithic. I wanted to do things that each one was somewhat connected to the next one, but different. Contingency is what I was interested in this space. And I think that's why I brought in these different types, or I have developed these different types of structures, and different ways of dealing with each of those structures.